All right, let's dive right in. Welcome to the Special Explainer. I know your Pad 270 paper on Malaysian politics is just 4 days away, so you can consider this your ultimate high-yield study guide. We're going to cut through all the noise, lock down the absolute core concepts from your lecture notes, and get you completely prepared to ace this exam. Let's do this.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're covering 5 crucial sections. First, what is democracy? Second, the Malaysian democratic paradox. Third, defining the party system. Fourth, the evolution of political parties. And finally, key coalitions and players.
Let's kick things off with Section 1. What is democracy? We've got to look at the foundational theory before we can analyze Malaysia's specific setup. Okay, keep this classic, highly testable quote right in your back pocket. When you're sitting in that exam hall in 4 days and you need to open your essay with a really strong academic footing, Abraham Lincoln's definition is the absolute gold standard. It perfectly captures the ideal that government has to be based on the consent of the governed.
Now, take a mental screenshot of this list right now. Seriously, these 6 points are a prime target for exam questions about the objectives of a democratic system. Your professors want to see that you understand democracy isn't just about showing up to vote, it's about providing accountable government, improving decision-making, and fundamentally enhancing the dignity and equality of every single citizen. So, we know the theory, but how does it actually look in practice? That brings us to Section 2, the Malaysian democratic paradox.
Here is exactly where theory collides with reality. Martin Seymour Lipset famously argued that good education and positive economic growth are basically the main engines for democracy. But you should absolutely pose this critical paradox in your exam. Malaysia has spent decades building a decent education system and a really strong economy, yet it faces these unique political hurdles that completely defy traditional Western models.
To back this up in your essay, point to independent global indices. For example, the 2019 Freedom House report specifically scores the nation as only partly free with an aggregate score of 52 out of 100. So, despite all that economic success, the actual democratic mechanics are visibly constrained.
To explain this dynamic in your paper, you literally must cite political scientist William Case. Back in 1992, he coined Malaysia a semi-democracy. Make sure you use that exact term. He characterized it by its tightly contained political liberalism, particularly during the era of Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. It's a system where democratic structures exist, sure, but the regime carefully manages and maintains its power.
Now, this timeline, it's absolutely crucial. You need to memorize these exact 5 stages of democratic evolution to ace the historical context questions. We go from the early consociational days, which just means power sharing across different groups, right after independence, to the shift toward authoritarian dominance post-1969, the tight grip of Mahathirism, the rise of the Reformasi movement in the late 90s, and finally, the historic regime change in 2018 that births New Malaysia.
Let's look at who actually runs this machinery in Section 3, Defining the Party System.
If you get a definition question, use Joseph Law Palambara's precise wording to demonstrate total academic rigor. A political party isn't just a social club. Its self-conscious, primary purpose is to take and hold public office to control the machinery of government, either all by themselves or in a coalition. When you're analyzing these parties, you really must emphasize their ethnic-based structures. Most were founded strictly to protect the interests of a particular ethnic or religious group, which means purely ideological, non-communal parties are pretty rare and often struggle for support. And because of this fragmented ethnic landscape, the absolute necessity of forming coalitions is a massive defining feature of the whole system. To understand why they are so ethnic-based today, we have to look at Section 4, the evolution of political parties. Anti-colonial struggles in the 1920s and 30s sparked a massive political awakening. But what's really important for your exam is knowing exactly who led these movements. The nationalism was primarily segmented by the 3 different types of education systems the founders went through: Islamic education, Malay education, and English education. This fractured start really set the tone for decades. Also, definitely remember early radical movements like Kesatuan Melayu Muda, formed in 1938.
Okay, huge trivia warning here. Pay close attention because professors love to test this. Do not fall for this trick on your paper. While UMNO became the massive dominant force we all know, they were actually not the first. The very first Malay political party was Parti Kebangsaan Malaya Malaya, or PKMM. Write that down.
As we discussed just a minute ago, survival in Malaysian politics has always required teamwork. The very first attempt at a multi-ethnic coalition was Putra AMCJ, but their proposals were totally ignored by the British. The second major attempt, however, succeeded wildly, the Alliance Party, which brought together UMNO, MCA, and MIC. This basically set the blueprint for all future Malaysian governance.
Finally, let's round out this study guide with Section 5, Key Coalitions and Players.
First up is Barisan Nasional, instantly recognizable by their dacheng, or scales logo. BN rose from the ashes of the tragic 1969 riots, essentially replacing the old Alliance Party in 1973. Led originally by Tun Razak, this coalition became the dominant force in the country for decades, maintaining an iron grip right up until their historic defeat in 2018.
Next, you need to be able to contrast these two heavyweights. On one hand, we have the Democratic Action Party, or DAP, symbolized by the rocket. They strongly advocate for a multiracial, secular, center-left social democracy. On the other hand is PAS, the Islamic Party of Malaysia. Founded in 1951 by Muslim clerics, they contrast sharply with DAP by pushing heavily for an Islamic state and the implementation of hudud, or Islamic penal law.
And then you have PSM, the Socialist Party of Malaysia. They are a really fascinating case study for your exam because they are a rare ideological outlier. They struggle for mainstream popularity precisely because they stubbornly avoid the standard ethnic and religious lines that dominate the country, and instead they focus entirely on class struggle and wealth distribution.
We also need to recognize the newer actors constantly shifting the balance of power. These parties are usually driven by major historical turning points. For instance, PKR was born directly from the political earthquake of the 1998 Reformasi movement after the deputy prime minister was sacked. Similarly, Amanah was formed much later in 2015, splintering off when moderate and progressive professionals were ousted from the past leadership.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. As you sit down to write your Pad270 paper in just a few days, I want to leave you with this exact provocative thought pulled straight from your lecture notes by Abdil Rashid Motkain. We saw in the 14th general election that decades-old ruling coalitions can be overturned and that new alliances are often ephemeral. But the ultimate question remains: will Malaysian politics always be based on racial arithmetic? Use this exact framing in your exam conclusion to show your professor true mastery of the material. You've totally got this. Good luck on the exam.